wonderful opportunity to interact with young people. And also thank you to all the NGO partners who are part of this journey with us. I just want to start with this idea that Anilji was talking about, that Swami Chinmaya talks about the reward for Seva is more Seva. And it's really anchored in a philosophy that your journey of becoming, right, of being able to unfold the divinity within you emerges when you are able to serve others. And through this, you are realizing who you are. So it's a process of becoming, it's a process of doing, it's a process of thinking, and all of these are sort of grounded in the idea of Seva, that it's allowing you to serve in ways that enable you to unfold the divinity within yourself. So I think it's a very, very powerful sort of, I don't want to call it an idea. It's a very powerful philosophy with which one is able to live one's life and also to be able to work, whether you are in doing business, whether you are working with an NGO, wherever you are, whatever you do, can it be in service, right? In service to the larger whole, in service to others, in service to the universal consciousness. And when we do that, then we are also striving for perfection. So I think it's a very, very deep philosophical idea that we must try and sort of internalize and try and see how we can embody it in practice. So having said that, I want to say today, sort of a disclaimer, that I'm not really talking so much about the existing ecosystem and all of that. I'm hoping that when I start interacting with you through a course, we will get deeper into that. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some emerging ideas in the space of, let's say, the social sector, but more importantly, in the context of whether it is business, whether it is government, or whether it is social sector organizations, there is an emergent conversation. And I thought that it might be inspiring for us to sort of, get a sense of what are these emerging ideas and what is the context in which these are emerging. So I will try and, share some ideas with you for the next maybe 20, 25 minutes. And then we can have a sort of Q&A. So please do put down your questions and let's take it from there. Yeah. So I'm just going to share screen just to sort of anchor, right? So Adya has very, very sort of generously talked about this expansive mindset for social change. And so that's the context in which I thought we can talk about some contemporary ideas. So let's just take a step back and look at the context in which we are, right? What is the world population right now is 7.9 billion. And India's population is almost 1.4 billion. And in 2050, by the time we reach 2050, the population is going to be approximately 9.8 billion. And 2050 is going to be when all of you are going to be in the system, working, contributing, and serving to create the kind of world we want to live in. So this is sort of your journey through that. I'm not sure I'll be around, but all of you are certainly going to be there. But today's context is also about huge economic inequality. The world's richest 1% have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people. Now, this is something that is unacceptable if we are talking about a sense of oneness a sense of compassion and love and caring for all sentient and insentient beings. How is this even acceptable? And this inequality also has got exacerbated during the pandemic time. We must ask ourselves a question, and this is something for all of you to reflect on, which is that what has really caused this kind of inequality? What is the deepest level, right, at which this inequality begins? And this is a question for us to reflect on. Men own 50% more of the world's wealth than women. And I'm talking about this in the context of economic inequality. So please take it in that respect, that wealth, of course, we can look at it as a sort of multiple dimensions, because we do talk about Ashtalakshmi in our culture, and that wealth is, Dhanalakshmi is only one of the types of wealth. So in that context, 50% of men own 50% more than women in monetary wealth. Look at the gender inequality index, right? And there are 3 dimensions around which gender inequality is measured. One is empowerment, the economic status, and reproductive health. And each of these has different indicators, which I'm not getting into right now. But one can see, right, the gender inequality index across different organizations. And right now, for example, Afghanistan is very much in the news. Just look at the gender inequality index there. But look at India as well, right? So there's something that we must keep in mind when we look at what is the context in which social sector work actually happens. We have different ways of looking at resources or basic needs. I just picked water because this is one of the most basic needs, one of the Pancha Mahabhutas. And water, 1 in 9 people in this world do not have access to clean water close to home. And the issue is exacerbated by the fact that more than 50%, almost 60% of world population is going to find it difficult to meet the needs for water, simply because we have drawn more from what Mother Earth has given us in terms of, it's like we are drawing more from the bank than the bank has. And that is an unsustainable way of living. So a large proportion of populations do not have access to basic drinking water requirements. This is also a conversation that's happening around the world, right, about mental health and well-being. And there is a Gallup study, I'm sure you will all probably refer to it when you do your HR course. But if you look at the figures, right, 11% of the world population is suffering from mental health issues. And it has been exacerbated, no doubt, by the sort of isolation and lack of human contact, lack of the ability to go out, which has resulted in greater numbers of people suffering from mental health issues on account of the pandemic. The most important part of our lives, a large part of our lives, we spend at work. And by this Gallup study, in the American workforce, 16%, right, and it must have increased now, are not actively engaged with the work that they do. Now, why is this important? If we go back to what we were saying about the becoming, right, and doing, if a large part of our service to humanity is through our work, and we are not mentally engaged with it, how can we be at peace? How can work give us joy? So a large number of people are actually miserable in their workspaces. And this is sort of a negative feedback loop that, you people suffer from mental illness, they're more miserable, workspaces makes them more miserable, and so on. And that's why we are seeing large numbers of suicides, lots of broken homes, etc., etc. So this is a conversation that we don't have too much, but we must look at the science around the climate crisis. So there is the Stockholm Resilience Center, which has mapped 9 planetary boundaries. And out of these 9 planetary boundaries, we have already crossed 4, which means that by the standards of many scientists, the planet is already in a state of collapse. We are in a negative loop in which the permafrost is melting. We have rising water levels in the sea. The air is getting polluted. And also that the rate at which land system usage has changed is very, very soon leading us into the red. We are also putting into the atmosphere new types of particles, nanoparticles, radioactive materials, lots of pollutants, both organic and inorganic, and microplastics. Now, all of this, right now they're in the process of measuring. They haven't even measured what is the carrying capacity of Mother Earth. What is the carrying capacity of Mother Earth? And to what extent have we as humans led Mother Earth to change the way in which she is able to thrive and flourish, the way in which she is able to restore health, the way in which she is able to regenerate, right? And so the minute that we take cognizance of this, not just at a head level, but also at a very heart and spiritual level, it changes the way that we relate to Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth doesn't become just a source of resources for us to exploit and use. So this is the kind of context we are in, right? And that if we look at sustainability, which is the sort of international conversation, and you must have all heard about the SDGs, the 17 of them. The conversation around sustainability and the way that we've defined sustainability is to say development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future. But if you look at this, we've already compromised the ability of the future. So the time has come for us to start looking at regeneration and to ask ourselves, what are we trying to sustain? Do we want to sustain this kind of a negative feedback loop that has emerged? Or do we want to create the conditions for thriving and flourishing of all life? Biodiversity, every day, several species are becoming extinct. So how do we start creating the conditions for thriving and flourishing of all life, of restoring and regenerating the systems that we have, whether it is economic systems, whether it is social systems, ecological systems, political systems, as well as from the point of view of technology. How are we using technology grounded in ethics? And this is a big conversation, right? So there is a need, in my view, and the view of several people who are working in this space today, that we need to start transforming our worldviews. So on the left side, I have tried to say what is the dominant or current paradigm and what is the direction we want to move in is on the right side. So one of the biggest drivers today has been that the purpose of life has been dominated by the idea of economic progress. That It is how much are you able to accumulate? What is the profit that we are able to make? How do we grow the economy? And consumerism seems to be the predominant sort of religion, right? And we have separated humans from nature and a sense of the cosmos. That the idea is that nature needs to be controlled and exploited. And in this process, we have become very destructive with respect to Mother Nature, and we are seeing it all around us, which is what also the Stockholm Resilience Center is talking about. A lot of our paradigms are based on a sense of scarcity, of competition, of efficiency, of, what is the ratio between input and output. A lot of our conversation is using a machine metaphor. And anything which is considered of value is valuable if it has a market price. We've also had a great deal of focus only on the cognitive forms of knowing, of analysis, of reducing a whole into different parts and really looking at each part to understand it better, but not stepping back to look at synthesis. Unfortunately, our education system has also become that way. So for many of us, the connection between physics and chemistry doesn't become apparent at all, or the relationship between algebra and geometry. We break it down to such levels that the connections we tend to lose sight of. So what is the direction we want to move? And how can this idea that we are part of nature and not apart from her, that what Mother Earth has offered us is sacred, how can that inform the way in which we think about life and about our place in this larger universe? So the purpose of life needs to be seen in a more holistic way. That it is economic progress plus, right? So a balance needs to be drawn between the economic progress as development and progress or development around other areas, right? So how are we enabling that? How do we look at, instead of a sort of competitive space, how are we creating abundance through cooperation, through collaboration, through sharing, through co-creation? Can we transform our worldviews into that direction? Which means, can we live as life? How do we look at living systems? What can we learn from living systems? And that if we start looking at everything having an intrinsic and inherent value, which is not necessarily determined through a demand supply or price demand supply, how will that shift the way in which we are with each other and our relationship with the planet? So it is an urge, right, to say, how can we include in our ways of knowing a reflective and intuitive way of experience, of wisdom, being integrated with an analytical way of knowing, right? So rather than a very reductionist way, can we look at a more holistic way? How are we looking at relationships today, right? A lot of relationships are grounded in a very transactional, right? I'm giving you this because I expect something in return, right? The sense of seva is not coming from there at all. How do we dominate? How do we exploit, right? The HR language, for example, says, how do we use this person? because we are paying them X amount of salary. How do we use this person? So almost reducing the divine human, sort of expression into a very boxed in resource. We have also emphasized a lot on individual freedom and rights. And there's very little conversation on duties, right? And rights can only emerge when you're also performing your duty. So there is a direct relationship between duties and rights. And we need to find a balance between these. Organizations that we work in, right? We look upon them as machines. So even our conversations have a lot of the machine metaphor, that organizations drive something like they are a car, right? But if you started looking at organizations as living systems that are spaces for enabling this seva, for this space for becoming, for contributing to a larger purpose, then the way that we will look at organizations will be very, very different. And this applies not just to business organizations, but social purpose organizations as well, or the civil society organizations. A lot of civil society organizations, the majority of them, do borrow practices from the corporate space because they seem to be more efficient. But what is the balance that we are able to find which enables people to thrive and flourish even while they are in seva? So there is a lot of breakdown of a sense of oneness, this sense of interconnectedness, of interdependence. And life is interdependent. We are interdependent. And the idea of Ubuntu, you are because I am because you are, right? It can only have, it's a very, very indigenous idea, because there is a sense of wisdom of this deep interconnectedness and interdependence, of being part of a whole, and that our existence is dependent on the thriving and flourishing of everyone else. So this transformation of worldview is a big conversation that's happening around the world today. And that if we have to create or co-create the future, then this transformation of worldview is an imperative. There's no choice in this, right? So what are some of the shifts we need to make as social sector participants, right? One of the things that we must remember is that we are working in a system. And so when we start breaking down the wicked problems or the complex problems that we work on into smaller bits, we tend to forget that we are also part of this system. So instead of taking a sort of linear, siloed approach, can we start looking at the whole, understand the complexity within which we work, and look at embedding system thinking in the way we think about design? Instead of seeing people as beneficiaries or targets, right? Just listen to the language, right? How can we see people as participants in their own development? And how can we create the space for that? How do we move from a human-centered design to an eco-social design, which includes human beings, but does not exclude the ecosystem and other living beings? How do we scale through this process of networks? How do we look at principles and patterns instead of trying to replicate? How do we look at place-based, because every place has its own essence, or what we call swabhava, right? It is an expression. There is an innate potential in every place. Can we understand that deeply and enable that to thrive and flourish? Instead of it being expert-driven, and seen from a techno-managerial point of view, can we start looking at it becoming more interdisciplinary? And when I'm saying it is about the work that we do. Can it be interdisciplinary? Can it be integrative? And how do we look at local wisdom, traditional wisdom? How do we integrate that within the kind of work that we do? Moving away from competition. Today, there's a lot of competition between organizations. But if we really need to shift, right? If we need to shift from where we are in the development trajectory, there is a need for us to learn to cooperate, to collaborate, and to learn to co-create. Because if you work in education, you can't work in education in a silo. You need to be supported by people who are working in the health sector. So a child who is coming to school, if you think that you can focus only on the learning outcomes and the pedagogy, it is inadequate, because how can a child with an empty stomach, who is suffering from malnutrition, whose health indicators are so poor, how can she learn? So we need to see how we can start looking at these complex issues through a process of collaborating with others, so that we are able to shift the whole rather than just one part of it, because that is not going to shift the system or transform the system. How do we look at organizations as living systems, which I talked about earlier, and the idea of leadership within this larger context? How does leadership play a role in facilitating evolution of individuals, evolution of systems, evolution of organizations, evolution of the ecosystem itself? If development is about this thriving and flourishing and evolution, then how are we transitioning into this space? So these are some of the sort of ideas that I felt were important for us to think about as we start working in this space, as we start contributing to organizations. Are these ideas that we can carry with us when we are going into these organizations? How can we be conscious of our own worldview? Can we start questioning our own assumptions and our biases, right, when we go into this space? Can we keep an open mind and think about who are we being right now? Who are we becoming? And through this process of becoming and doing as a sort of reinforcing cycle, how are we in seva to this larger ecosystem? Right? So before I close, I just want to all of us to sort of look at a prayer for the well-being of humanity. And so if I can just request you to please close your eyes. All of you may be familiar with this prayer. It's a prayer for well-being of all. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhave. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Suparna, I want you to know that these are some of the best 25 minutes of my time I have spent in soil ever. I want you to know that you've done a super job of synthesizing and presenting a philosophy in a very clear and, wonderful manner. And our soil is very privileged and blessed to have you on our board. And the students are very blessed. If they were to see the recording again and show this is the finest wisdom, perhaps, that you could get distilled in 25 minutes. So And wherever I go, no matter whether I go to a church or a mosque or a synagogue, anywhere in the world, I close my eyes in front of the altar and I recite this prayer. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukha bhagavate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So wherever, in fact, my universal prayer is this prayer. So thank you for bringing this to our students' attention. Brilliant. Absolutely.
And if I may also, sorry, just take a minute. No, I just want to take 1 minute to thank you, Suparna ji. Absolute, like Anil said, these were the most beautiful 20 minutes so far of our lives. So what truly matters, and you've described it so lucidly and in such crisp manner, in such a soft manner, I think that's a great reminder to all of us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Pleasure.
So I think, Ajay, if we have some time, I'm happy to take questions or any clarifications people would want, any thoughts that are emerging, reflections and insights.
The faculty have responded. Students, your response and your questions.
So you can have a raise of hands. Anybody who is present in this forum can raise the hands and, ask anything which is occurring to your mind, any example, anything that you have felt during this last half an hour. YV?
Good morning, ma'am. Suparna ma'am, that was a really eye-opening session that we had.
YV, why don't you tell your full name to Suparna?
Ma'am, my name is Vaivitavya Vadlamani. I'm from Visakhapatnam. So the thing is that when we actually talk about inclusive learning and inclusive, growth, the problem with most of us are, what I understand and what I feel is that we are a much more egoistic race, basically. So if you take that into consideration and making a change in people, which is over the, I think almost about from for I think 40 years, Greenpeace had been trying to actually make everyone understand that this is not the way in which we have to actually treat Mother Earth. But unfortunately, it has not gotten to most of the. In fact, I'll not go to most of the people also. In fact, for me itself, it has not gotten completely sunken in. So how do you basically change this, self-destructive mindset that we actually have, that we actually incur most of the time? And yeah, you have explained quite a bit of it. A little more insight would be much more good.
I think it's a very important question, right? Because we are working in that space where we are trying to bring about this transformation. And not just Greenpeace, there was a book written, which all of you should read by Rachel Carson, called The Silent Spring, right? Where she warned about all the chemical pollutants that were going into Mother Earth and the kind of repercussions it would have, not just for humanity, but for all living beings, right? Whether it is animals or plants. So in many ways, I feel that the indigenous wisdom, and in particular the Indic wisdom, because it was so sophisticated, right? It talks about the Purusharthas, right? Where it was a balance. Your purpose of life was self-realization, right? And so if your journey of life had to be in balance, in harmony with the cosmos, right? You had Artha, Kama, Dharma and Moksha, right? And if the purpose of life was Moksha, then Artha and Kama were delimited by the idea of Dharma. And dharma is basically comes from the word dhri, which is being in harmony, right, with cosmos. Now, many indigenous cultures are actually ecological cultures, just like the Indic one is, right? And so a lot of the, we need to rediscover this wisdom. We need to rediscover this wisdom. And I think going back to, this is not to say we should abandon science and technology. It is not in contradiction with each other, right? But it puts a limit on and sort of makes you realize your place in this larger ecosystem. So there was, if we are seeing that even plants have consciousness, which a lot of studies are showing today, then the way that you are in right relationship with all other living beings, that's the term being used today. Can we be in right relationship with all living beings on planet Earth, right? And so it is, I think it can see, and human beings have, or human beings may be the only species which have what is called viveka, which is our ability to discern, right? You discern, you've been given that intelligence. So this is the time for the intelligence to express itself, the greatest creativity to emerge in ways that we can restore. See, Mother Earth will continue to exist whether we exist or not, right? We are unimportant. Mother Earth will continue to exist. So if we care about ourselves, we need to start asking ourselves what really matters. And so I think it is really this journey in some ways of going back to a spiritual anchor. And when I'm saying spiritual, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about this sense of connectedness, of interdependence, of love, compassion, and caring for each other and for every sentient being on the planet. So I think the transformation will come from there. It's an inside-out process. Sorry, long answer to a
very long question, of course. Thank you.
Important question.
So, Ivy, I think that's a question that we are all asking ourselves about. How do each one of us, take this ahead? Gayatri, you had a question. I saw you raise a hand.
Good morning, Suparna ma'am. Thank you so much. I think it was a great session, something we all needed to hear. I had a question about, you spoke about how organizations should be looked as, as living systems and not just like corporate machines, where we, need to contribute towards the greater good. But how exactly do we strike this balance where we don't lose our edge, where we don't become soft, but we also need to, do something better, do something greater for the greater good, for the better purpose? Because I don't understand how that might happen.
So if you even see, everyone goes back to Adam Smith, right? And Adam Smith actually talked about what is the purpose of businesses, right? The purpose of businesses is to actually serve society. Somewhere along the way, we have lost that sense, right? So if we start looking at organizations as living beings, right? They actually play a part as a part of the larger system. And an organization can thrive and flourish only if it is seeing itself as a part of the ecosystem. The minute that we are only thinking about our own profit, our shareholders only, then we are actually creating a space where you're not in service to the larger ecosystem, right? Now, there are many organizations which are combining this. And even the Tatas, for example, when Tata started, right, his companies, TRD Tata, one of the biggest things for him was how is our company serving society? It was not only profit driven, right? Somewhere along the way, we have lost that sense. In our Indic wisdom, businesses also had to do charity. Businessmen also had to do charity. You could not take more than what you were entitled to from Mother Earth, right? So the other part of organizations as living systems is that in organizations, the way we look at human beings today, and I was mentioning this earlier, is that we look at them as resources, which does not enable an individual to be their creative best, to be able to sort of contribute their sense of intelligence, their sense of creativity to solving a larger problem that they are working on, that the organization is contributing to. And this is a two-way process. It's not that only the individual is contributing to the organization, but in this process, the individual is able to realize parts of themselves that they never knew existed. They're innovative, they're creative, right? So there are organizations, Gayatri, in the world today where some of these principles are being actually embedded in organization design. The way that organization thinks about itself, its systems and processes. And there's an amazing book called Reinventing Organizations, written by a person called Frederic Laloux, right? He's a Frenchman who has empirically studied organizations that are able to create this kind of service to community, but at the same time, they're able to be profitable. They're not making super normal profits, right? And in your economics class, you learn about profits and supernormal profits. They're not making supernormal profits, but they're continuing to grow and thrive and flourish and serve communities. There's an organization which is in Netherlands called Buurtzorg, which is basically an organization of nurses, completely decentralized system, which is in service to community, in service to people in the community. And they're doing this, they are a profitable organization. There are some 40,000 nurses in that organization today. In fact, they have a branch in Kolkata as well, right? Which is built, the way that they've designed the organization is completely different. So when we stop imagining organizations as these hierarchical monoliths, but as living systems, right, which are sensing and responding to what community needs.
And I have just sent a PDF document of a book called The Living Company. Arjay will send it to all the students, from a common friend called Ari the JS, who was in the Shell company,
Yes.
So this is a book published in 1997 about lots of research on which are the organizations which are the longest surviving living systems.
Yes.
And what is the essence of that?
Yes.
So I would urge the students who have the interest in going into deep, and this is not an assignment for you. This is only for those students who have the courage to read more. Yes, because some of you have the courage to read more. This book will interest you. It might change even your life for the better. It is on Ravi Gayatri. This will, if you really are interested in that question that you just asked, this book will really embellish your thinking about it. There's lots of examples like that, right?
Yes. Thank you, Anilji.
Thank you. In fact, immediately his face and his work came back to me. So I said I should now, fortunately, it was available on the internet free. So I just sent you the PDF document.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think, and Gayatri, you also are based out of Jamshedpur. Presently, you are in Gurgaon. So I think the Tata example was right down there. Thank you. Any other questions? Anything at all? I know there are some deep thinkers in the class, but it's okay. Just ask.
What time is the first NGO supposed to speak?
After the break, Anil, so we will start at 11:15.
Okay.
So we have.
So more questions. Yeah. So more questions from questions or comments.
Yeah.
Reflections, insights.
Ma'am, just a thought. It was really a great session. You have shown really something very new that I have come across last couple of months. So the question is, ma'am, there are certain social causes this NGO is working. Can you give a current sectorial representation that this is the undermined sector? There's still a lot of work to be done in that sector, and people are not coming up with their ideas in that sector. And some sector which is already doing good and flourishing, and maybe given a less importance because that has already achieved their what they have tried to do. So is there any something kind of representation or any thought of that?
Oh, Shubhro, this is a very long conversation. So one of the things that I was talking about is that a lot of organizations in the social sector tend to take one issue and work only on that. One problem, not even an issue, right? And so even while they are working, things around the context are completely shifting, right? So they tend to wear blinkers and work in silos. So I'm not sure that anybody has achieved, right? Because even while we are working, things around us are shifting. So what does it mean when we are saying we have achieved something, right? So if we start looking at it from a systems perspective, right? And we start looking at place-based initiatives, which is not what organizations do today. Because a lot of the social sector organizations are built on a corporate factory model where they have one product or two products and they are producing those one or two products. But in the social space, that's not how it works. So a lot of organizations which feel that they have achieved something, right? They've achieved something in that particular silo. It's not necessary that they've actually transformed anything. So I think one of the things, and I'm going to say something very controversial, is that we have to stop thinking sectors and start thinking place. What is the potential of this place? And not try to fill gaps, but say, what is the potential of this place? And how can we enable that potential to be expressed? Which is a very different way of thinking from saying this is the gap and let's address that gap. By the time you address that gap, things have already changed, which is why social problems are called wicked problems. They are wicked because when you start working on them, they're already shifting. So the solution that you started off with doesn't work in 5 years. So you start all over again. Rather than that, if we started looking at what is a place-based initiative, which links, for example, water, soil, crops, cropping patterns, forestry, animal husbandry, and takes a more integrated view, more holistic view, and builds the capability of that place, of the people in that place, to be thriving and flourishing in their space, then you're building the capability for people to learn, to respond, to shift, rather than somebody providing a service, filling a gap continuously. I think this requires us to shift our mental models around the paradigm of development itself.
So when we take you to Siddhbadi later this year, which we hope will happen,
yes, yes,
and you visit, the Chinmaya Organization of Rural Development, there we started in Cord first with, primary health program and for the young women of Kangra.
yeah,
Soon we realized that actually there was a lot of potential in Kangra. So what started as a primary health center got developed into a full-fledged community development and rural development program encompassing everything for encouraging Kangra to thrive. And, I personally have seen from the time I went there in the 1980s, one of the most impoverished districts in the country, to today a district which is thriving and doing exceptional work thanks to the women of Kangra and thanks to the pioneering work by Dr. Shama Maitre and her colleagues in Cord. So, we will actually go and witness that. So hopefully in the next few months, we should do that. So that is a shining example of what Suparna just said.
Anilji, you made a very important point in this, right? Which is the period of time required for these kind of transformations, right? It cannot be done in a 3-year project cycle, which is the way that normally social sector organizations think, right? Partly driven because of the way that funders think about, change. So if you're really thinking about transformation, it requires this. I was in a symposium a few days ago on water. And there is this person called Krishna Singh, who has worked in a place between Ajmer and Jaipur, who has taken 40 years to transform 60 villages, right? They are water self-sufficient, but what is more important is they've created an ecosystem which is appropriate to that place. They are growing the kind of crops that are appropriate to the place. Their animal husbandry is driven by what is the place talking to them. So I think this sense we have lost. So we are, sort of creating cookie cutter approaches. Whether it is Chennai or it is Sikkim, we want to take the same project, right? Just doesn't work. So the time factor, taking a place-based, decentralized systems approach is so critical to the way we think about development.
That's why when we set up the Manasar campus, our dear colleague and friend Ann Stadler told us, listen to the land.
Yes.
Where we are setting up the campus, listen to the animals,
yes.
the birds, the plants.
Yes.
And also in the self-leadership class, students will recall reading that article of a common friend of Suparna and I, Daniel Christian Wall. And, that whole thing about setting up the council, as Daniel talks about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really where this comes from. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So we have a last question, and Aditi, would you like to come up front and ask the question?
Yeah, ma'am. Sure. Thank you. Suparna ma'am, great session. I mean, you almost covered everything. You covered about climate. You talked about development sector. You also talked about the transformation that is currently needed. And I actually have a thought that there are approximately 85 students in the class. And if we will ask everyone, people will choose either IT or FMCG. They will go for hospitality, but very few, or I can say zero, will go for development sector. So how can we shift this mindset? I mean, there is a notion that we will earn less. We have to struggle a lot. So I want
to here is an offer, Aditi, here is an offer. Soil as a policy.
Yes, sir.
That and this policy was made 10 years back, that if a student wants to join the social sector and the salary is less than 5 lakhs, that is the salary we decided 10 years back. Now we can upgrade it to, let's say, 6 lakhs. Let's say the social sector pays you only 3 lakhs and the minimum you should get is 6. So let's say 3 lakhs will be given by soil to that student for the first 1 year to help him or her get started in the social sector.
Wow.
That's really a great initiative, sir.
Yeah. So if any of you want to join the social sector, then if you are getting less than 6 lakhs, we will find a way to give it back to you as a scholarship or as a subsistence allowance or whatever you call it for the first 12 months. So this will help those who really want to make a career in the social sector. Let's see how many of you are inspired. At least for the first 1 year, you can be covered by this subsidy so that you can return a part of your loans and things like that. But we will encourage you to join the social sector.
But Aditi, I have another sort of perspective on this, which is that, see, whether you are in FMCG, whether you are in IT, wherever you are, if you think about your work as Seva, right? Work as Seva, then the way that you think about your FMCG work, the questions that you will begin to ask, right? Is the product that I am making going to serve the well-being of the individual who is consuming this? Is that a question that I can ask myself? How can I improve this product in a way that it is not polluting the environment? How can this product be in service to human beings and to the planet?
Absolutely.
And so you will start